The young woman was stunned to realize she had been transported to another world. She wondered how she had died, as everything had clearly happened too suddenly. She recalled that she had always been healthy and had never overworked herself to the point of sudden death. She was also certain she hadn't been hit by any of those familiar transmigration trucks. In the end, she concluded that she must have crossed over while fast asleep. Although she knew transmigrating was a trend, she felt that randomly picking someone to possess a body like this was quite inappropriate. Ironically, she had transmigrated right when the original owner of this body was having her funeral. She found it truly frustrating to suddenly come back to life, making everyone around look at her as if she were a ghost. Needing to know her own identity, she immediately blurted out a question to the person across from her, asking for her name. The entire following day, she was endlessly interrogated by priests and doctors until she was driven mad. Feeling incredibly exhausted, she decided to ignore everything and brush it off as a medical miracle. She wished she knew what the original owner's personality was like so she could more easily handle the current situation. Unfortunately, not a single memory of the original owner appeared in her mind like they do in the movies. The martial arts novel she had read before transmigrating was of no help to her now. She muttered to herself that she had no choice but to figure things out on her own. She decided to use the amnesia excuse to cover up all her strange actions. Fortunately, there was a willing maid who helped and provided her with the necessary information. She learned her name was Evangeline Johansson, but she remained completely clueless about this person. Based on everyone's expressions, she vaguely guessed that this was a story of transmigrating into the role of a villainess. The servants trembled at the mere sight of her, and some were even so frightened they fainted. A young maid even fell to her knees and begged for her life the moment they made eye contact, right before being dragged away. She thought to herself that the original owner must have been incredibly cruel to terrify people to such an extent, wishing the person had lived a kinder life. She noticed her distinctly striking red eyes in the mirror. In romantic novels, characters with red eyes were often depicted as having very difficult personalities. This eye color was usually seen as an ill omen, causing the owner to be ostracized and treated poorly. She daydreamed about being praised for her beauty by a handsome man, but realized the reality was that Evangeline had been heavily abused. The fact that her father hadn't shown his face even once, despite his daughter just returning from the dead, made her believe the original owner was truly despised. She clicked her tongue, realizing she had ended up with a terrible father who often blamed his children for his wife's passing. She started asking about typical characters like a fiancé, a crown prince, or a Grand Duke of the North. The terrified maid informed her that she didn't have any fiancé at all. The crown prince was already a middle-aged uncle with 2 children, and archetypes like the Grand Duke or the Holy Maiden simply didn't exist. She realized she couldn't extract any more information from the shivering servant. She got the idea to look for a diary the original owner might have hidden away to understand more about herself. Unfortunately, she realized she couldn't read the writing in this world, even though she could speak normally. The maid was confused and anxious about her master's strange behavior. The servant hurriedly ran off to find textbooks for her to avoid displeasing her. Watching the maid run away, she realized she was left all alone again. She decided to take advantage of the empty house to start exploring. She stealthily and thoroughly inspected every corner of Evangeline's room. Even the bathroom was searched without missing a single spot. The luxurious living room also quickly became her target. She began to feel frustrated because she couldn't find where that wretched diary was kept. She suddenly remembered what the servants had said about a secret room in the mansion. It was a room that Evangeline, while she was still alive, never allowed anyone to enter. She hoped she would find some important clues inside. The door to the room seemed very heavy and was mysteriously jammed. She had to muster all her strength to try and force it open. The door suddenly burst open, causing her to lose her balance and tumble to the floor. Feeling a sharp pain, she blamed herself for not calling someone to help open it instead of doing it herself. As soon as she looked up, she was stunned to notice something unusual in the room. She gasped upon seeing what was right in front of her, realizing it was the answer. The falling cherry blossoms in the wind signaled a tragic event that had occurred earlier. Evangeline Johansson, the only daughter of the family, had actually passed away. Although the mansion announced the cause of death as an illness, all the servants knew a different truth. They could never forget the image of a pair of pale, lifeless legs dangling from a cherry blossom branch. The cherry blossoms that day were in haunting and terrifying shade of red. The sweet scent of the flowers seemed to still linger in the noses of those who had witnessed it. The funeral was then prepared quietly, hastily, and in complete secrecy. It was a modest burial ceremony with an incredibly gloomy atmosphere. They had used the excuse of an infectious disease to prevent other nobles from attending or offering condolences. Even though it was the funeral of a noble lady, not a single person truly mourned or cried for her. An eerie feeling suddenly enveloped the entire space where the funeral was taking place. Strange rustling sounds started to emanate from inside the sealed coffin. Amidst the quiet atmosphere of the ceremony, those noises echoed clearly, startling everyone. It was the terrifying sound of scraping and cracking wood, as if something was trying to escape. People began to murmur in fear at the unnatural event unfolding right before their eyes. The priest stared in horror at the coffin, unable to believe his eyes. Long, cascading white hair began to spill out from inside the slightly opened coffin. The strands looked as soft as silk but carried a bizarre and spine-chilling aura. Blood-red eyes slowly opened, piercing through the souls of everyone present. Anyone who accidentally met that gaze felt suffocated and terrified by an entity that shouldn't exist. The priest desperately prayed in his heart, but all his efforts yielded no results. The newly revived corpse started to make its first movements in a highly mechanical manner. It tried clenching its fists and turning its head as if practicing adapting to a human body. It looked like some foreign entity struggling to control a vessel it had never used before. It asked for its own name in a deeply mysterious and melancholy tone. After completely adapting to its new form, it smiled with immense satisfaction. A secret instruction on how to summon an ancient entity after wandering the world was revealed. A bizarre three-eyed black cat suddenly appeared among the vibrant red rose bushes with a haunting meow. Back in the present, she was still standing in a daze in front of that mysterious and dark room. The place was filled with towering bookshelves, appearing to have once been used as a study or reading room. She noticed everything in the room was covered with cloth and wondered if Evangeline was trying to hide some shameful past. She was certain the secret diary had to be hidden somewhere around these bookshelves. She started sifting through, tossing aside books with obvious titles on the spine or ones that were too thick, like dictionaries. She cheered with excitement when she finally found what she had been searching for. The notebook had patchy ink stains and numbers at the top that looked like a combination lock. She commented that the notebook had an incredibly gloomy appearance, perfectly fitting the taste of a typical villainess. She intended to keep it safe and wait until she got literacy books to study it carefully. A piece of paper unexpectedly fell out of the notebook, drawing a magic circle surrounded by strange characters. She was deeply astonished to discover a summoning circle tucked inside a diary. She thought to herself that the story she had transmigrated into seemed a bit outdated compared to modern tales. To survive in this unfamiliar fantasy world, she decided to utilize every resource she could find. Seeing a puddle of blood-red liquid on the floor, she got the idea to use it to redraw the summoning circle. But she didn't want to use them. She felt that using her fingers to draw directly would be much more fun and exciting. She prepared herself to perform the ritual, not caring if the entity that appeared was a second-tier spirit king. She earnestly prayed that someone would appear and form a contract with her right away. The silent night enveloped the Johansson mansion under the dim, cold moonlight. Count Johansson, with a cold expression, looked down at the trembling maid standing before him. Daisy stood shivering, her eyes squeezed shut, even though she hadn't committed any crime. The Count didn't offer any reprimand or punishment. Perhaps he knew Daisy was the late daughter's confidant, regardless of their difference in status. It was Daisy who had bravely volunteered to care for the thing borrowing the young lady's body. Whatever soul was inside, that corpse still bore the exact resemblance to his poor daughter. The Count thoughtfully asked Hannah about the situation and what it had been up to in the mansion lately. Daisy hesitantly began recounting everything in a deeply anxious tone. She said it used amnesia as an excuse to relentlessly ask all sorts of things about Lady Evangeline, from family relations to age, habits, and favorite foods, and even boldly walked around wearing the young lady's clothes. It was as if that thing was desperate to turn into the real Evangeline. However, Daisy firmly stated that it couldn't perfectly imitate the young lady. The servants who witnessed that imposter either fainted on the spot or were dragged away begging pitifully. It seemed it didn't care in the slightest about the lives or feelings of the servants. On the contrary, it looked at them with a gaze full of disdain and hatred, as if looking at filthy insects. Meanwhile, the Lady Evangeline that Daisy knew was very fragile, preferring to suffer illness rather than say a harsh word to anyone. If it truly wanted to take over the young lady's identity, it shouldn't have looked at others with such contempt. Speaking up to this point, Daisy couldn't help but collapse and sob loudly right in the middle of the room. She hurriedly apologized for letting her personal feelings take over, but the Count gently reassured her that it was all right. He asked her to calm down and continue her report. Daisy recalled the time it had claimed not to know how to read, but she soon realized it was just an excuse to send her away. When Daisy returned, she caught it casually reading a book in a room that was supposed to be securely locked without a key. Curious and afraid, she had approached to get a closer look. It was using the blood on its fingertips to draw bizarre symbols and patterns on the floor. As it drew, it muttered something, and the only word Daisy heard clearly was contract. Just as Daisy was about to lean in closer to hear better, unfortunately, she and it accidentally locked eyes. That was everything Daisy had witnessed and recounted to her master. The Count pondered deeply over the word contract, wondering if this was some kind of dark magic. He feared that the blood would summon another monster, feeling heartbroken at the thought of his daughter taking her own life. Because she wasn't given a proper burial or a ceremony at the temple, an evil spirit had taken the opportunity to possess her body. The most concerning part was that not even holy water could banish that wicked soul. With no other choice, the Count had to tell Daisy to continue staying by its side and closely monitor all its actions. Seeing Daisy keeping her eyes tightly shut the whole time, the Count wondered why she was doing that. She tremblingly replied that she was too scared because she had constantly felt something staring at her for a while now. The Count was startled and suddenly turned his head to check if there was anything unusual. And right there, he faced dozens of deep green eyes glaring at him from the darkness. The scene shifted to another space, full of mystery and haze. Evangeline, now a new soul, appeared with a dazed expression. Suddenly, a strange cat with 3 eyes appeared and let out a loud meow. She was stunned to realize she had just been chosen as its owner by this special guest. She wondered what kind of world this was where even a cat looked so bizarre, but was still relieved to see it lying obediently on the bed. Anyway, this cat was super adorable with its soft, fluffy fur, and it actually let her pet it. Looking at the cute pet, she couldn't help but swallow hard. So she decided to indulge herself a bit by pulling it into a tight hug. She continuously kissed the cat, ignoring its weak sounds of protest. Both person and cat rolled around on the bed, and she laughed in delight, proving herself to be a true cat servant. While they were having fun, there was a knock on the door, and a servant announced it was time to help her with her morning wash. She hastily regained her serious composure and let the servant into the room, while the cat quickly jumped away. She noticed that today it was a completely unfamiliar servant, not Daisy like usual. She intended to use the cat as an icebreaker to get to know the new girl, so she asked if there were many cats in the mansion. Contrary to her expectations, the servant coldly replied that all the cats had been exterminated a long time ago. Hearing the devastating news, she froze for a few seconds in utter shock and confusion. The servant explained that a terrifying plague originating from cats had occurred in the past, leaving her groaning internally. She suddenly realized that if her little cat was discovered, she would definitely be done for. Hearing a meow, the servant asked suspiciously, but she hastily pretended not to hear anything. The servant still found it strange because the meow sounded too close, while she was sweating profusely because the cat was right at her feet. She silently prayed for her little darling to stop meowing before they both ended up dead. Fortunately, the servant left without searching the room, allowing her to breathe a sigh of relief. She started to regret taking it in without asking, putting herself in a tough spot in this mansion. But if she chased it away now, it would surely die. She guessed the cat's family probably didn't survive either. She planned to ask a priest or doctor to examine it, then formally request the Count's permission to keep it. However, the butler informed her that the Count was swamped with work and couldn't see her right now. She remembered that the Count despised this daughter anyway, so she had to ask the butler to pass on the message. Seeing the butler bow respectfully, she awkwardly told him to lift his head because she had no intention of scolding or hitting him. Getting straight to the point, she simply wanted to ask if she was allowed to keep a cat. The butler looked surprised, while she worried if this request violated some taboo. The butler replied that it wasn't a problem at all, but there was still a hint of hesitation in his words. The cat casually started drinking the bowl of water the butler had brought. The butler said that the cat just needed to drink holy water, and it would be fine. She wondered to herself if holy water could solve the plague, why did people ruthlessly kill all the cats back then? After seeing with his own eyes that the cat had finished drinking, the butler asked to be excused. Thinking the matter was temporarily settled, she was breathing a sigh of relief when the maid suddenly called her back. The maid seemed hesitant, as if about to say something quite important. Afraid that other servants might harm the cat, she suggested embroidering its name on a collar to mark it. She was moved to tears, thinking she had finally made friends with this kind-hearted maid. But the joy was short-lived when she realized she couldn't read or embroider, and the maid had already slipped away. She began to doubt if she was being secretly bullied like those supporting female characters in novels. She slumped onto the table, crying miserably because she was so useless she couldn't even write her cat's name. The three-eyed cat just sat there, watching her struggle with the harsh reality after transmigrating into this body. A ray of hope suddenly flashed across the shimmering starry sky. Suddenly, she discovered she could read the words easily, as if she had been gifted a bonus skill. She jumped up in joy, telling herself that the miracle must have happened because she had cried so pitifully. So she eagerly set to work embroidering her little darling's name right then and there. But the result was a miserable failure. She sat dejectedly because her work looked like a complete mess. Even though she had tried to use the original owner's skills, the stitching looked so wrong she couldn't even recognize what she was embroidering. She mumbled, wondering if she should throw it away and start over, while the cat stared intently at the collar. Surprisingly, the cat appeared very excited and fond of the poorly embroidered collar. It stretched out, insisting she put the collar on its neck. She was touched to the point of madness, calling the cat an angel for its tolerance and adorableness. Having not been able to keep a cat in her previous life due to her circumstances, she now felt like she was living a dream. She hugged the cat tightly to feel its warmth. She officially named her household's big boss Pudding from that day on. Meanwhile, in a dark corner, the new maid muttered enviously about people wasting precious things. Her eyes burned with resentment, thinking that if she had that item, her younger sister would surely get better. A ghostly voice suddenly echoed, asking if she wanted to possess it, making her jump in shock. A dark entity loomed by the window, promising to show her how to achieve her goal. The evil voice continued to tempt the maid with dangerous promises. The scene shifted to a forest of falling cherry blossoms exuding a gloomy aura. The maid stood quietly, observing Evangeline playing by the window with a calculating and dark mindset. Hannah drew the curtains to start a new day of serving the young lady. Count Johansson, terrified by the strange eyes lurking around the mansion, had hastily fled back to his own territory in the middle of the night. The maid Daisy also took similar action, refusing all letters of recommendation to become a nun in a convent seeking peace. The mansion was now unusually empty, with all management duties falling on the butler's shoulders since the count was busy tending to family matters far away. The butler's sole and heaviest responsibility now was to keep an eye on that thing borrowing Lady Evangeline's body. And Hannah was the one entrusted with this important task. Her job was to thoroughly report every move of that vessel to the butler. Hannah sat across from the butler in the dark room to begin her report. After Daisy left, Hannah was the only one brave enough to take on the job of serving the young lady. Because nobody wanted to do it, the salary skyrocketed, and Hannah, being strapped for cash, accepted to venture into this dangerous place. Hannah was extremely panicked because she kept hearing meows echoing in her ears, even though she had assured the young lady that they were all exterminated. The butler heard nothing but silence. He worried that yet another servant was about to go mad in a short time. He generously offered to write a letter of recommendation for her if she felt overwhelmed and wanted to quit immediately. The tragic howling meows still haunted her, making Hannah extremely tense in the face of that tempting offer. Even so, Hannah decided not to run away and asserted she would stick with the job. Her ears now could only hear the cat's meow, entirely unable to hear human voices, so she had to read lips to guess what was being said. The real reason Hannah risked her life like this was because she had a sick younger sister at home who needed care. To save her ailing sister, she was willing to do anything, even face a demon. The butler assigned Hannah a special mission after hearing that the entity expressed a desire to keep a cat. He handed her a vial of holy water and strictly ordered her to make the cat drink it no matter what. Hannah looked at the vial with a calculating gaze mixed with extreme tension. She thought to herself that if she had this expensive holy water, her sister would surely be freed from her illness. An evil entity suddenly appeared and asked if she truly wanted to possess that holy water. It promised to show her a way to achieve her wish if she listened to its temptations. Hannah realized that before her eyes was a terrifying monster, not a normal cat. She wondered if this was truly the cat lady Evangeline wanted to keep. Initially, she intended to report this incident to the butler right away to earn a reward. But then she realized that no matter how big the reward was, it wouldn't be enough to buy that precious vial of holy water. The image of her sick sister lying and waiting vividly appeared in Hannah's mind again. She clenched her fists and made a risky and dangerous decision. For her sister, Hannah was willing to do anything, including betraying her master. Hannah did exactly as the monster instructed, secretly swapping the real holy water with fake water for the cat to drink. Lady Evangeline remained calm as ever, completely unaffected by the holy water. Only Hannah knew that the real holy water actually worked on the monstrous cat. However, she pretended not to notice and obediently followed all the cat's bizarre demands. Perhaps thanks to this cooperation, Hannah was no longer haunted by the ghost cat's meows, and the monster also acted normal in front of others. Serving the young lady brought her a very lucrative income. Thanks to that extra money, Hannah could drop by the market to buy all sorts of delicious food to nourish her sister. But what made her the happiest wasn't the money. It was the fact that her sister had completely recovered after drinking the holy water she had stolen. Hannah told herself that serving a terrifying lady and a monstrous cat was a small price to pay for this moment of happiness. Meanwhile, Evangeline casually continued reading gloomy books and occasionally let out a creepy laugh. She was thrilled because she could now read and planned to rummage through the original owner's diary to find the summoning spell. She daydreamed about summoning a powerful second-tier spirit to become an overpowered character in this world. Her dreams were shattered when she realized this was Evangeline's mother's diary from 20 years ago. The content inside was no different from a sappy romance movie, detailing how the Count proposed to her in the year 370. The diary also recounted how her father strictly forbade and confined her because he suspected the Count only wanted to dig for the Duke family's wealth. In the end, she regretted not listening to her father. After he got hold of the dowry, his affection gradually faded away. Evangeline had little interest in these romantic stories and continued flipping through to find the summoning spell. She suddenly stopped when she discovered something extremely strange in the book. She picked up the piece of paper with a confused and curious expression. It turned out this magical translation was badly smudged, making it impossible for her to understand its meaning. Annoyed that the translation was incomplete, she decided to put it aside and wait for another time. But the moment she looked away, that important piece of paper mysteriously vanished. Evangeline was furious because the diary was still there, but the spell page was missing. She suspected someone had sneaked in and snatched it. She immediately interrogated Hannah to see if anyone dared to snoop around her room yesterday. Hannah recalled that Donald had dropped by yesterday and found it strange that he had suddenly disappeared today. Evangeline flashed a dangerous smile upon knowing who was bold enough to steal her belongings. She resolved to find his place and take that brat's head to claim her item back. The dark night enveloped the slums, a place filled only with the curses of drunkards demanding more liquor. The knights were patrolling and constantly complaining about having to guard this shabby place. A knight suddenly heard a strange noise and noticed a carriage rushing towards them. He was utterly amazed to see the Johansson family's luxurious carriage appearing in the filthy slums. Inside the carriage, Evangeline relentlessly urged the driver to go even faster. Her eyes blazed with anger, swearing to make the thief pay dearly. The carriage stopped in front of a wooden house. Evangeline was determined to get the spell page back at all costs. She couldn't let the chance of living an overpowered life in this world fall into someone else's hands. With a loud crash, Evangeline delivered a thunderous kick, smashing the door to enter and catch the thief. Going back to an earlier time, Hannah's younger sister was enduring painful captivity. The little girl was desperate, not understanding why she had fallen into such a dire and terrifying situation. Donald was still engrossed in his blood circle, completely ignoring the little girl's pitiful pleas. Just earlier, the little girl was sitting obediently in front of her door, waiting for her sister to come home from work. She even intended to give some snacks to the cat that often appeared nearby. Even though her sister had told her not to go out late at night, she thought it was still bright out, so it should be fine. Suddenly, a dark hand reached out from a blind spot and grabbed the poor little girl. Donald had subdued her and brought her here with a savage smile. He casually apologized for making her wait a long time in fear. Donald declared loudly that it was time to perform the important sacrificial ritual. He figured ordinary people would think this was a child's game, but to him this was real magic. Donald's eyes completely lost all reason. He firmly believed in his crazy intuition. He insisted that Lady Evangeline's resurrection after suicide could only be the work of a demon. Donald was smug for having discovered the truth about the demon summoner, unlike those cowards out there. He began muttering about how the Count had long used his daughter's illness to siphon money from his in-laws. Donald knew well that if Evangeline really died, that massive source of funds would vanish. From that, he deduced that the Count must have made a contract with a demon to bring his daughter back to keep the money. Donald continuously cursed the Count for being a hypocrite who only cared about money and fame. He boasted that he had known this dirty scheme early on while cleaning his office. Donald was once almost beaten to death for snooping into the documents detailing that massive amount of money. Now he held a sharp knife in his hand with an incredibly cruel intention. Donald ambitiously aimed to become an even more respected and powerful noble than the current Count Johansson. He began chanting wicked spells to initiate the blood sacrifice ritual. A magic circle drawn with blood appeared, looking gruesome and mysterious on the floor. Donald forced the little girl to cry and beg for salvation to make the ritual more effective. The little girl could only stay silent as he took her blood to satisfy the demon's appetite. Donald coldly made a cut on Kana's neck and told her not to overreact because it was just a small scratch. He paused for a moment to remember which part of the curse he was at, then clicked his tongue when he found his train of thought. Bizarre mutters about worship and unnatural things began echoing throughout the dark room. Donald yelled out, welcoming the angel of light about to descend amidst the thick black smoke. A blinding flash of light suddenly erupted, dazzling both people struggling on the ground. Donald's eyes widened in horror at the strange phenomenon unfolding right before him. A haunting, pure white figure gradually emerged in the blinding aura amidst the ruins. The mysterious voice continued to ring out, demanding worship as a glowing red eye began observing everything. Evangeline officially appeared with the magnificent and authoritative presence of a true deity descending. The sound of a trumpet echoed from the void, as if signaling the presence of a supreme entity. Evangeline internally complained because the door opening was so loud it startled her. She also blamed herself, realizing the door was just too old and decrepit, which caused such a noise. She quickly regained her serious composure, realizing there was a more important matter to settle right now. Upon stepping in, Evangeline was heavily shocked to see that the earlier thief had now upgraded to a child kidnapper. Hannah ran over in a panic, calling Kana's name, which made Evangeline instantly realize these two knew each other. Evangeline was furious upon seeing that Donald dared to lay a hand on the only friend she had just made. She was determined not to let him off the hook. She stepped closer to separate him from the little girl. Donald trembled, muttering her name with a look of utter disbelief. Seeing him shivering in fear, Evangeline internally mocked him, then coldly asked if he had just called her. She interrogated him, asking if he was thrilled to have stolen her summoning circle, making Donald stutteringly ask back if she was its true master. Noticing she had his full attention, Evangeline affirmed that was the exact reason she had tracked him down. She generously offered to listen to his wishes, though internally she only intended to hear him out to find a weak spot. Donald hesitated, about to state his demand, but the words seemed caught in his throat. The freckle-faced man started screaming in sheer excitement, his eyes wide with greed. He dreamed of a future filled with immense wealth, living in extravagant luxury until the end of his days. Evangeline accurately guessed that his goal revolved around money, but suddenly remembered she didn't have a single coin on her. She clicked her tongue, deciding to just bluff something, and offered to grant him the title of Count Johansson. She extended her hand, promising to place him in that seat of power in an incredibly convincing manner. Donald froze at the unimaginable offer, his eyes turning blank. Evangeline started to panic because he remained silent for too long. She told herself that as soon as the hostage was safe, she would throw him straight into the dungeon. Donald muttered the word count with a face full of desire and agreed that he liked the idea very much. He fantasized about taking his former master's position and thought it wasn't a bad idea at all. Donald cracked a twisted smile and decided to seal the deal right at that moment. He raised the knife high toward Kana to complete the bloody ritual in a state of frenzied excitement. Evangeline struck first in the blink of an eye, unleashing a burst of power that sent Donald flying before he could act. He crashed to the ground, the sharp knife also knocked out of his grasp. Evangeline slightly regretted that the strike to the back of the neck didn't feel satisfying enough. She thought she should have aimed for the neck like in action movies. That would have been cooler. She stood watching to see if he would bounce back to retaliate, but seeing him lie completely still, she was temporarily relieved. Hannah quickly ran over to Canna, while Evangeline was still feeling proud of her lucky strike. Hannah frantically tried to untie her sister, reassuring the little girl to be a little patient. The maid burst into tears because her hands were trembling so much that the knots only grew tighter. Evangeline told Hannah to step aside and let her do it, as her panic was only making things worse. With just one swift, decisive motion, she freed Canna from the annoying ropes. The two sisters embraced each other. Hannah couldn't stop asking if her sister was hurt anywhere. She affectionately scolded her sister for being disobedient and going out when she had just recovered from an illness, while Canna softly apologized. Hannah hugged the little girl, her heart aching, and blamed herself for letting this happen. She felt incredibly relieved that she had arrived in time to save her only family member. Evangeline felt a warmth watching that touching scene, but was also a bit awkward because her villainous reputation didn't quite fit these moments. Instead of crying along, she decided to do something more useful by calling the little girl's name to check on her condition. She turned to look at Donald and wondered if she should throw him into the dungeon to rot. Or perhaps a crueler punishment to make him pay for what he had done. Evangeline suddenly turned pale upon seeing a bleeding wound on the poor girl's neck. She coldly asked Donald how his own neck felt after daring to hurt someone else like that. Canna kept smiling, saying she was fine to ease her sister's worries. Donald stealthily reached for the knife, intending to make one last reckless move. Hannah screamed in terror as she saw Donald suddenly lunge from behind the young lady. A spray of blood splashed everywhere, covering the space amidst everyone's shock. Evangeline stared in disbelief at the sinner's body that had just collapsed right before her eyes. Donald lay dead in the very blood circle he had drawn, with a fatal slash across his neck. Evangeline wondered if he had committed suicide out of fear of punishment, then clicked her tongue, assuming that was the usual fate for criminals. She informed Hannah that he was dead and secretly regretted not giving him a taste of true justice first. Canna clasped her hands, thanking the young lady for saving her life with eyes full of admiration. Evangeline felt that playing the good guy was quite interesting and brought a strange sense of accomplishment. A warm feeling spread everywhere, making her feel a bit hot, before she suddenly heard Hannah calling her in a panic. The maid pointed at the raging fire and urged the young lady to run away immediately. Evangeline was shocked to realize that the shimmering effects all along weren't from her aura, but an actual fire. She was dumbfounded by her own disastrous mistake amidst the chaos. The three of them fled outside. Evangeline still wondered why a fire broke out when there was no lit fireplace inside the house. She suddenly remembered Donald's summoning circle and began to feel that something was wrong. She suspected the servant had used her spell to mistakenly summon a fire spirit, turning her into someone who lost all magic to another. Recalling how she had struggled drawing the circle until her fingers bled for nothing, she felt incredibly bitter. She looked at the burning house and regretted that the spell page was probably reduced to ashes by now. Evangeline let out a self-deprecating laugh, wondering if she should just give up on her dream of being an overpowered main character. Memories of the damp room, the cold soup, and the stiff bed surfaced in Canna's mind. A tiny window, barely the size of two hands, was her only connection to the outside world. That had been the entirety of the poor girl's small, confined world for so many years. Canna had been frail since birth, and her mother passed away as soon as she was born. Her father also died early from overworking to earn money for her medical treatments. The family's burden then fell entirely onto the shoulders of her hardworking older sister, Hannah. Despite her family sacrificing everything, Canna's condition didn't improve. She had once thought it would be better if her sister just gave up. However, deep down, Canna still yearned to cling on to this fragile life. Her sister always called that burning desire hope. Hannah would often point out the window and promise that one day Canna would be able to walk freely like everyone else. Because of that promise, that tiny window became something incredibly special to the little girl. Canna always found joy in imagining herself as a part of the ever-changing scenery outside. Until one day, a strange visitor, the black cat, appeared by that window. A miracle happened when Hannah brought back the vial of holy water and said it was a gift from Lady Evangeline. Hannah joyfully announced that from now on, her sister would no longer have to suffer from pain. Contrary to expectations, the first emotion that surged within Canna was sheer anger. The little girl felt aggrieved, thinking how her father and sister had wasted their entire lives just for a vial of water handed out like charity. Her unfocused hatred began to direct towards Evangeline, the person who had given that holy water with such an arrogant attitude. But a major event occurred that completely shifted all her thoughts. Kanna now looked at Evangeline as a true guardian angel, someone who had granted her a second salvation. Back in reality, Evangeline was still pondering how to appropriately deal with Donald. She leaned down and asked Kanna if the wound on her neck hurt a lot, her expression full of hidden meaning. Kanna smiled brightly, asserting she was fine to dispel the tense atmosphere in the room. Donald, surrounded by wicked red eyes, ultimately chose to end his own life. Evangeline coldly announced his death while blood was still splattered everywhere. Kanna accepted that reality calmly because to her, ending it like that was more than enough. Committing suicide was considered an unforgivable felony for those who rejected the life bestowed by heaven. The souls of such people had only one destination, the darkest depths of hell. The fierce fire flared up as if to welcome the sinner who had just departed the world in solitude. Kanna stood quietly amid the violently raging sea of fire like a solitary shadow. The little girl felt this blazing heat was gentle, like her sister's embrace or the warm midday sun. From afar, a mysterious man stood observing the house being consumed by the fire with a thoughtful gaze. He couldn't help but wonder where that bizarre fire came from in the middle of this slum. A crowd began to gather in increasing numbers around the scene to witness the horrifying spectacle. Evangeline calmly commented that more and more people were coming to watch the drama, turning this place into a real show. She coldly ordered everyone to step back and maintain a safe distance from the blaze. The knights finally appeared to restore order and demanded the citizens stay away from the fire. It seemed someone had tipped them off. Evangeline internally mocked that the knights' uniforms looked overly flashy, fitting a typical fantasy romance world perfectly. Among them, she noticed one man who looked the most radiant and dazzling, standing out from the rest. Seeing him walking straight toward her, she couldn't help but be startled and suspicious of his intentions. Evangeline started to feel anxious as the situation seemed to be getting more complicated and worse than she thought. But she had to admit that this knight possessed a level of handsomeness that left people stunned. That good looks almost made her weave an entire romantic backstory, even though in reality, there was nothing between them. He politely introduced himself as Gabriel, the commander of the renowned Perilos Knight Order. She wondered if this was the male lead of this world, given his incredibly perfect appearance that far surpassed everyone else. Gabriel gently asked the reason why a noble lady like her would be in this filthy slum. He bluntly stated that this was absolutely not an appropriate place for a lady to take a stroll. Evangeline laughed at herself, thinking she really looked like a true villainess when she was immediately suspected upon meeting someone. Behind her, Hannah and Kanna were still standing quietly, witnessing this highly tense conversation. Gabriel worriedly warned Kanna that this place was very dangerous, but Evangeline was touched when the little girl bravely stepped up to defend her. She asserted that she wasn't here for a stroll but to look for a missing servant. She casually pointed at the blazing house and declared that the owner of that place was her servant. She added that even though the culprit was still inside, his fate had probably been sealed. Evangeline coldly stated out of the blue that he deserved to die, and keeping a piece of trash like him alive was just a waste of space. Gabriel froze for a few seconds at such cruelty, then requested her to explain the situation in more detail. She started panicking, not knowing if anyone would believe the truth about a servant summoning a fire spirit and then committing suicide. Kanna suddenly spoke up, taking the lead to explain, and accused Donald of unjustly kidnapping her. The little girl recounted how her sister had to desperately beg the young lady to come save her life. Seeing that Gabriel seemed to buy Kanna's words completely, Evangeline felt relieved because this version sounded much more convincing and logical. But a sudden thought flashed through her mind, leaving her so shocked she couldn't speak. She started pairing Gabriel and Kanna as the strong, black-haired male lead and red-haired female lead, following typical story tropes. Evangeline completely believed that Kanna was the true female protagonist of this story and no one else. She realized she had accidentally ruined the classic hero saves the beauty scene for the main couple right from the start. Her premature intervention had entirely destroyed the fateful meeting between Gabriel and Kanna. Still, she reassured herself that she couldn't just stand by and watch a life be in danger, even if they were just characters in a book. Kanna gave Gabriel the cold shoulder, acting dismissively, which made Evangeline feel bad for the newly rejected male lead. She accepted her role as the villainess who ruined the plot and told the two sisters to go to the Johansson mansion if they ever ran into trouble. Gabriel stood silently watching them walk away, his mind filled with baffling thoughts about that strange lady. At first, Gabriel thought he was facing an exquisitely carved stone statue amidst the crowd. In such a rundown slum, the appearance of a marble masterpiece was unimaginable, but he still didn't perceive her as a human. The simple reason was that there was absolutely no trace or warmth of normal life coming from her. When the glowing red eyes of someone who should have been dead turned toward him and spoke, he felt genuine terror. Gabriel was so shocked he almost couldn't utter a word in the face of that haunting and ghostly presence. He sensed that beneath that calm exterior was someone who looked down on everyone in the world as mere ants. She only showed a bit of concern for Kana, and it seemed the little girl herself had been influenced by this non-human entity. Kana's blind and fanatical reverence made her look no different from a zealot following her faith. A knight hurriedly ran over to report to the commander about the unusual state of the fire. The fire had died down on its own without spreading to any surrounding buildings. Only the target house was completely reduced to ashes. The knight urged Gabriel to follow him to witness something even more horrifying and abnormal. They had discovered a charred corpse lying bare right at the scene of the fire. Gabriel felt that this wasn't just a simple coincidence. An indescribable unease swelled within him. From this angle, the charred skeleton looked exactly like an angel spreading its wings in a tragic yet majestic pose. Now he was just a freeloader living off his wife, desperate to create a masterpiece of a lifetime to salvage his honor. Jim frequently wandered everywhere in search of the inspiration needed to save his dying career. His weary legs walked aimlessly, hoping to find a true muse for his next work. And then, while wandering, he stumbled upon the bizarre fire blazing with an aura full of dark omens. At the center of the flame, as bright as the sun, he believed he had seen a holy angel. But the harsh reality was that it was merely a charred skeleton lying bare amidst the ruins after the fire died down. Jim hurriedly returned home and immediately grabbed his paintbrush with a fierce, manic look in his eyes. He kept muttering about the sacred mission he had just been granted from those ashes. The burning desire to complete this painting of the angel completely consumed his mind and soul. However, Jim soon realized that ordinary paints couldn't capture its haunting beauty. His gaze suddenly locked onto a mixing palette knife that was giving off an inviting, shimmering gleam. The reflection on the sharp blade, along with falling drops of blood, signaled a bloody tragedy about to begin. With his body covered in fresh blood, Jim hummed a bizarre tune while using his own blood as paint. The painting of the skeletal angel gradually emerged, hauntingly rendered in the horrific dark red of human blood. The carriage rattled along under the dim moonlight after a night filled with terrifying events. Hannah timidly asked if they should prepare a separate room for her younger sister at the Count's mansion. Evangeline asked for Hannah's opinion directly and offered to take care of her since their old house had burned down. Hannah intended to tell her sister to refuse, fearing the young lady's difficult nature would cause more trouble. The memory of Donald's death and Kana's strangely satisfied expression still weighed heavily on Hannah's mind. When Kana asked if her sister could stay with her, Evangeline agreed immediately without a second thought. Kana enthusiastically wanted to pick her own room, leaving Hannah utterly surprised by the excessive closeness between the two. She couldn't understand how her usually shy sister could laugh and chat with this terrifying lady so quickly. Hannah feared that if the butler saw Kana completely healthy, her theft of the holy water would undoubtedly be exposed. Evangeline suggested putting Kana in the room right below hers, making Hannah jolt in panic. That was supposed to be the Countess's room, but Evangeline figured that since it was empty, moving in was no big deal. Hannah mumbled that she would report the matter to the Count, even though her heart was filled with anxiety. She silently prayed that the butler wouldn't discover the truth before both of them were kicked out of the mansion. In the dark of the night, Kana excitedly told her sister that she could still hear the young lady's footsteps walking around upstairs. The little girl seemed extremely fond of the luxurious room and the spacious bed she had just been given. Kana also felt that the appearance of the young lady's cat Pudding at their old house was a destined connection. In contrast, Hannah shuddered, secretly thinking that the cat was actually a highly dangerous monster. The two sisters held hands tightly in the darkness to seek comfort and warmth after a long, exhausting day. Kana sincerely thanked her sister for bravely saving her from the clutches of death. The little girl finally confessed that she had actually been very scared, even though she always tried to act strong in front of her sister. Hannah felt guilty for ever thinking her sister was strange, when in reality the little girl was just trying to hide her fear. To Hannah, Kana would forever be her small, adorable younger sister who needed her wholehearted protection. Evangeline sat at her desk with a new goal. She had to genuinely become friends with the maid, Hannah. She thought about other transmigration stories where the female leads always found a way to win the male lead's heart. However, she didn't feel the slightest flutter around Gabriel, making her wonder if she was a defective female lead. Evangeline decided to bet everything on the female protagonist to find a way out of her villainous fate. She promised herself to protect Kana at all costs from now on. For the plan to go smoothly, she needed to write a very convincing letter to the absent count, to let Kana and Hannah stay in the room right below hers. However, the butler informed her that the count had gone on a business trip, which was why the room was lit last night, but its owner wasn't present. Evangeline worried that if she just sent a normal letter, he would coldly refuse because the predetermined plot was that he absolutely despised his daughter. Right then, a bold idea flashed through her mind. As a first step, she decided to tear out a page from Evangeline's mother's diary, a page filled with bitter curses aimed straight at the count. She folded it neatly and included it with her own letter. The result was that everything went smoothly. The count sent a reply agreeing to give her full authority and demanding she never write to him again. Now Evangeline could relax and keep the female lead and her supporter right by her side. She began to dream of a leisurely, happy, and fully enjoyable life. Escaping the villainous role made her feel excited and ready to experience her new life. However, the night Gabriel suddenly appeared with a serious expression and offered an apology before beginning his story. He delivered a terrifying warning that she might be accused of illicitly staging Donald's death. Evangeline was stunned, not understanding why the plot had taken such a bizarre turn. Earlier, this knight had sent a letter expressing his desire to visit her. Upon reading the letter, she knew he wanted to discuss a complication that had arisen in Donald's case, even though the group had already given their statements smoothly. She was certain he had found something strange while writing the investigation report. Meanwhile, Kana seemed annoyed, thinking he was deliberately bothering her young lady. Evangeline, on the other hand, was planning to match Gabriel and Kana together so she could secure a safe spot in the main couple's happy ending. She told Hannah to prepare some nice stationery to write a reply. She decided she had to send a response to Knight Gabriel right away. When they met, Gabriel greeted her very politely and expressed his joy at seeing her again. Evangeline asked bluntly if he had come here because he was worried about Kana's condition. Gabriel replied that Kana didn't seem seriously injured, which heavily shocked Evangeline given his indifferent attitude. In reality, both she and Hannah felt heartbroken every time they saw the scar on Kana's neck. Although she wanted to use holy water to heal it, Kana wanted to keep the scar, so she could only respect her wish and cry secretly. Gabriel got straight to the point, saying a complication had just come up and he needed to hear her opinion on it. He clearly looked troubled as he had to deliver this not-so-good news. He reiterated his warning that she could be accused of staging Donald's death in a shady manner. This unexpected development left Evangeline feeling completely cornered. Gabriel then asked her to look at what he was about to show her. Evangeline curiously asked what it was. She was startled to see the bizarre drawing on the paper. In her mind, she secretly criticized the drawing skills of whoever drew it for being utterly terrible. Gabriel admitted he had drawn it himself to explain the situation, and hoped she would be understanding, even if it was lacking. Evangeline froze, never expecting such a handsome man to have drawing skills worse than a kindergartner. She bluntly commented that no matter how you looked at it, the picture resembled a moth. Gabriel explained that when Donald's body was found at the scene, it had that bizarre shape. Witnesses started rumoring that Donald had received a blessing from the divine. Evangeline couldn't believe why a scumbag like him would be considered blessed. He was the one who had kidnapped Kana and then died to escape his crimes. However, an artist had painted that scene and gifted the painting to the temple, escalating the situation. Because of that painting, rumors spread throughout the temple, and people were even demanding to worship his corpse. Consequently, the higher-ups ordered a reinvestigation of the entire case. The goal was to ensure Donald's death wasn't an unjust one. The problem was that if Donald was officially recognized as blessed, Evangeline would be accused of faking his death. She felt like this world was trying to force her back into the villainous role. Gabriel stared intently at her and asked if everything she had said before was the truth. Evangeline realized that even the male lead doubted her. She felt stuck because changing her story now would only make her look more suspicious. She suddenly remembered that people here didn't even seem to acknowledge the real existence of spirits. Therefore, she knew no one would believe her if she said Donald had summoned a spirit at that time. She asked Gabriel back if he truly believed she had lied. Gabriel affirmed he didn't believe Donald received a blessing, but admitted the death was indeed extremely strange. He clearly expressed his desire to help her. Evangeline asked again to confirm his intention and received a firm answer. Gabriel hesitated, as if wanting to say something exclusively to her. Seeing his expression, Evangeline was flustered, wondering if he was feeling shy. With her reading experience, she knew this was the sign of a male lead falling in love with the villainess. She inwardly groaned, regretting that she had underestimated this whole transmigrating as a villainous genre. She felt it was quite outrageous to develop feelings for a character who was basically a paper doll while she was a real person. Evangeline stated firmly that she had absolutely no interest in him and wanted to cut off this relationship at all costs. Gabriel replied that it didn't matter at all. He simply felt curious about the kind of person she was. Evangeline was going crazy because those sparkling, romance novel-esque flower petal effects kept appearing around him. Getting back to the main topic, she explained that the reason she went looking for Donald wasn't because Kana was kidnapped. She went there because he had stolen her drawing, and the circle in Gabriel's terrible sketch was exactly what was stolen. When Gabriel asked for an explanation, she replied that it was a summoning circle. He pressed further, asking what it was meant to summon. Since people believed in the divine more than spirits, she just blurted out that it was a circle to summon an angel. Gabriel once again affirmed his intention to help her. A silence enveloped the space right after that. Everything around them seemed to hold its breath to gauge Evangeline's mood. Even the flower petals closed up to shield themselves from the wind. The world seemed to be left with only the sound of a pounding heart amid the quietness. She looked straight at Gabriel and asked once more about his intention to help. Evangeline exuded an overwhelming aura, suggesting he didn't know his own limits. She repeated once again that she wasn't interested in him. Gabriel acknowledged that, comparing himself to a human who pays no mind to a colony of ants in the garden. He felt she should be grateful he didn't just obliterate the weak for his own amusement. To her, crushing a colony of ants wouldn't be a sin, because she inherently owed them nothing. Evangeline was simply angry because a mediocre person dared to trespass on her territory. Despite being treated coldly, Gabriel still felt encouraged because he had managed to evoke an emotion in her. He felt as if he had just witnessed a brilliant flower blooming from a withered tree. Later, Gabriel stood next to his comrade under a giant cherry blossom tree. His comrade marveled at the extraordinarily massive size of the tree. The tree looked strangely lush, as if it had been nourished by some special kind of fertilizer. Gabriel unexpectedly saw the silhouette of someone hanging from the tree, but it disappeared instantly when he looked again. He wondered if the sight he just saw was merely an illusion caused by the drooping petals. The haunting image of a butterfly crushed under a carriage wheel flashed before his eyes. A close-up showed the mangled butterfly, while Gabriel sat in the carriage with an incredibly brooding expression. His face clearly showed a deep, unhappy contemplation. The illusion of Evangeline hanging from the tree kept lingering in his mind. He questioned whether it was due to the testimonies he had heard before coming to the mansion. A priest had claimed that he saw the resurrected Evangeline take her own life at the temple, even though there was no previous record of her funeral. That priest left no suicide note. There was only evidence showing he had secretly extorted money from the families of suicide victims. His comrade then reminded Gabriel about the piece of paper found at the crime scene. On it were unburnt words detailing the worship of the angel of light about to descend. Gabriel muttered the word angel with a deeply thoughtful look. He recalled Evangeline's statement about that circle being used to summon an angel. Once upon a time, summoning rituals to grant wishes were nothing strange, until a massive witch hunt broke out, wiping out all those who practiced them. In the silent space, someone was reminiscing about childhood memories, or perhaps even further back, and suddenly called out the name Rafaela while sitting in a moving carriage. While peacefully sitting in the carriage discussing spells, the driver suddenly screamed in terror because of an incident, making the horses rear up and giving everyone a huge scare. The driver had to brace himself and pull tightly on the reins to control the horses going wild on the road. The commander sitting inside tumbled over, bewildered and not understanding what the heck just happened, while his subordinate frantically asked if he was okay. The pink-haired character scolded the driver because he had boasted about his horse-driving skills earlier, leaving the driver bowing and apologizing profusely for the mishap. The driver explained that a cat had suddenly dashed out, startling the horses, but it was actually a bizarre three-eyed monster cat with leopard-spotted fur staring right at them. The pink-haired guy said he and his subordinate were fine, so they should let it go, as he'd rather endure a little pain than have the carriage run over that poor cat. Afterward, the pink-haired guy complained to the commander that his heart almost leaped out of his chest from fear, but the other man just stayed silent, looking outside without a word. The driver tried to soothe the black horse back to calmness after it was spooked. Seeing the situation had stabilized, the commander told everyone they could safely get back in to continue, and the pink-haired guy also urged him to get moving. However, the commander began to grow suspicious, wondering if it was too much of a coincidence that the carriage nearly flipped exactly when he mentioned spells. The story shifted to an ancient convent or temple hidden deep in the forest. Some nuns were sweeping and started whispering, asking each other if they had heard the story about the holy painting in the temple. One nun explained that the painting was like a gatekeeper that filtered out those without faith. A young lady had even fainted after seeing it and dreamt of meeting the sun god himself. A close nun from the Perilous Order was also mesmerized, unable to tear her eyes away for even a second. They also heard rumors that the high priest had given a generous offering to the artist to express his gratitude, leaving the others astounded by such lavish spending. Everyone was curious about how beautiful the painting must be to receive such high praise, secretly hoping to witness it with their own eyes one day. The nun named Daisy stood from afar, quietly eavesdropping on their conversation. Suddenly, someone called Daisy's name, snapping her out of her thoughts. Another nun asked where Daisy was heading, and she replied she was going to see Priest Boga because she heard he was looking for her. The other nun looked worried upon hearing that, telling Daisy that she probably didn't know how things worked around here since she was new. She exposed Priest Boga as a notorious pervert who preyed on newcomers and advised Daisy to absolutely stay away from him. Daisy turned pale with fear, making sure to thank the other woman for her kind warning. To avoid the sick priest, Daisy decided to hide in the library to clean up books until morning, hoping he wouldn't send anyone to her room looking for her. In her panic, she recalled the scene of a woman named Evangeline narrowly escaping a monster wearing her own face. Daisy told herself she didn't want to get involved in any more trouble. The lantern light flickered and crackled in the silent library. Daisy picked up the lantern, intending to leave when the door suddenly opened, and a silhouette appeared. Two male monks blocked her path with suggestive expressions, calling her sister. They interrogated Daisy about why she dared to hide in the library when they had sent word that Priest Boga was calling for her. Ignoring Daisy's fear, they forced her to come along immediately. As they walked, the two whispered to each other, wondering if the old priest would really return to normal just by seeing this girl. One of them confidently affirmed it would work because the old man's weakness was women, making Daisy realize in horror that she had been tricked. The priest hadn't called her at all. These two had taken her on their own. Daisy cried out in pain as they roughly pushed her into the room. They locked the door from the outside and declared they would only let her out when Priest Boga's condition stabilized. Daisy collapsed to the floor, weeping silently in helplessness. In the dark room, she saw the old priest babbling madly about some hidden puzzle piece that needed to be completed. He held a brush, drawing spells with an extremely obsessive and manic attitude. The priest's face clearly showed signs of madness as he hastily repeated over and over that he had to finish this right now. Daisy was utterly horrified when she realized the disgusting thing manifesting right before her eyes. A giant monster covered in piercing green eyes emerged, enveloping Daisy in a terrifying aura. After all her efforts to run away, she now understood she had to stop this summoning circle immediately before it was too late. The holy statue stood motionless, witnessing the wicked scene unfolding. In a moment of desperation, Daisy decided to grab a heavy object and screamed that she would kill anyone if necessary to save her own life. A dry, crashing sound echoed, accompanied by blood splattering across the floor. The people outside heard the strange noise, but told each other to just ignore it and pretend they heard nothing to stay out of trouble. Daisy sat in a daze amidst the pool of blood, while the men outside were feeling smug, knowing full well what horrible things would happen by locking her in with the old priest. The scene of death and blood spread across the room's floor, testifying to the horrifying event that had just occurred. Daisy was stunned and trembling, unable to utter a word about what she had just done. She looked at the magic circle drawn in blood on the floor, wondering what the hell she had just done. Daisy reassured herself that she was only trying to stop him, but then she began to fear what would happen if someone discovered this truth. Because killing a priest was an exponentially worse crime than killing a commoner, as he was someone blessed by God. The image of a guillotine appeared as a chilling reminder that if the truth were exposed, Daisy would undoubtedly face the death penalty. She collapsed, crying miserably, feeling that she had run out of options and had nowhere left to hide. In sheer desperation, Daisy could only silently pray for someone to appear and help her. Suddenly, bizarre, long black hair dropped down in front of her, making her flinch and ask what it was. Daisy gasped, asking if it was hair, when a gaping mouth with a bright red tongue emerged from the darkness. A strange, shadowy entity leaned close to Daisy and asked if she wanted some help. Daisy let out a blood-curdling scream, demanding to know what kind of freakish thing it was. The entity signaled her to be quiet and keep order. The two monks outside heard the scream, but mockingly asked Daisy if she wasn't the one who had said she didn't want to be discovered. The dark entity promised to let Daisy out if she promised to stay quiet, leaving her horrified as she wondered who this person was. She doubted whether he was even human, while he mentioned that he had tracked that thing here, but couldn't understand why he only found her. Intending to flatter him to save her life, Daisy quickly asked if he was referring to the monster covered in eyes. Daisy recalled the horrifying image of the multi-eyed entity she had seen earlier. The dark entity laughed in delight, asking her back if she could actually see it. He declared he had a score to settle with that monster and demanded Daisy lead the way, making her stutter in astonishment. He asserted that whether she wanted to or not, she had no other choice because she was the one who made the wish. The entity sarcastically pointed out that showing up to help her was already a bargain, so it was only fair that Daisy led the way for him. The old priest's corpse lay there, his face still covered in blood and looking haunting. Daisy looked at the entity in disgust, while he also mocked the rotting corpse. She thought to herself that only someone driven to the brink like her would have to strike a deal with a demon. The entity suddenly exclaimed, "Oops!" as if he had just remembered something. He said it seemed he had forgotten to provide the after-sales service for the two guys standing outside the door. The bizarre image of the two monks turned into mannequins with flowers on their heads appeared. A cold slicing sound echoed through the dark space. The sound of heavy objects falling and rolling on the floor followed. The entity casually remarked that he had accidentally dropped their heads while picking up the flowers. He gently patted the flower heads to attach them back onto the right spots on the two monks' bodies. The two guys now stood stiff as statues, with bloody slashes across their necks and lifeless, rolling white eyes. Daisy trembled as she watched the brutal scene right before her eyes. She felt nauseous and could only gasp in utter disgust. The dark entity laughed arrogantly, his laughter echoing throughout the room. He declared that he loved this and that everything was unfolding perfectly. As dusk fell, he pointed into the distance and told Daisy that what she was looking for was right over there. He smelled a familiar scent coming from that direction and asked her if he should really settle down there. Daisy could only reply aimlessly. Before leaving, the entity reminded her that if she ever needed help again, she could call him, but next time she would have to pay a worthy price. Daisy stood frozen, her sad eyes watching the dark silhouette gradually disappear under the falling cherry blossoms. There was a strange ancient tree there. Ever since a young lady had hung herself on it, the flowers had never withered. The driver asked Daisy where she wanted him to escort her. The carriage was ready, waiting for her to set off in the late afternoon.
Daisy shuddered as she noticed a deep, bloody gash on the driver's neck as well. He was now just a soulless corpse.
She tightly closed her eyes, trying to endure this cruel reality. Daisy lowered her voice and asked the driver to take her to the temple. Elsewhere, a white-haired girl jolted awake and looked around in confusion. She spotted a large black wolf lying faintly on the grass. She was utterly perplexed because she didn't recognize what it was. The wolf weakly looked at her with its glowing golden eyes, uttering a plea for her to save its life. The white-haired girl was dumbfounded to see a talking wolf, secretly wondering if this creature was a werewolf. In a dark space, a creature with leopard-spotted fur was lying motionless when the sound of approaching footsteps suddenly echoed. A mysterious dark silhouette appeared by the crimson window, mocking and wondering what the other was trying to pull in a place like this. The dark silhouette continued to ridicule the creature, saying that playing the role of a loyal pet didn't suit it at all, while criticizing the other for falling to a point beyond salvation. The leopard-spotted entity was none other than Fioros, who gradually revealed his terrifying form surrounded by countless glowing green eyes. A fierce clash erupted between the dark silhouette and the sharp-clawed monster, Fioros. Back to the previous scene, the black wolf feebly begged the girl to save its life, leaving her in shock. The girl began deducing as if solving a math problem, telling herself that in stories like this, a talking wolf would definitely transform into an incredibly hot werewolf. She imagined the scenario where the female lead, Canna, would often be bullied by the villainess, Evangeline, then cry in the garden and accidentally save an injured wolf. In her imagination, thinking it was just a poor animal, the female lead would care for it and have a lot of intimate contact with it. Then the wolf would turn into a handsome guy, they would start flirting and live happily ever after. Thinking of that romantic prospect, the girl was so excited she felt she could immediately write a novel inspired by it. But then she suddenly froze, realizing something was wrong. She panicked, wondering if she had just accidentally stolen the female lead Canna's fated meeting scene with the male lead. Seeing things weren't looking good, she intended to go find Canna right away so she could perform her duty of healing this guy. However, the wolf kept lying there, groaning and begging her to save it, making her reluctant to walk away. She awkwardly explained that even if it begged, she had no idea what to do right now. She complained about being a weak girl, physically unable to lift such a massive creature to move it. Suddenly, a flash of light blinded her, leaving her bewildered as she was teleported inside the house. Seeing that she was already in the room, she suspiciously asked if the wolf had done this, and it happily nodded to confirm. She suddenly realized that in this world, beastmen could also use incredible teleportation magic. Faced with such an earnest plea, she decided to put off finding Canna to give him first aid instead. She fumbled around looking for the wound, but because the fur was too thick, she couldn't see anything, so she told him to wait a moment while she figured it out. After a small poof, the wolf transformed into a black-haired man covered in injuries and asked if she could see clearer now. Seeing the deep wounds on his body, she panicked, realizing normal first aid wouldn't be enough, and wanted to go call a doctor immediately. Just then, her cat Pudding ran over, carrying a small vial in its mouth. The cat let out a meow and dropped the vial on the floor as if trying to deliver a message. She was amazed to realize it was a vial of holy water and didn't hold back in praising Pudding as a true genius. She affectionately rubbed the cat's head, praising her little pet as the smartest in the world. Even so, a fleeting suspicion crossed her mind whether Pudding might also be a beastman disguised as a cat. But then she brushed it off, reminding herself to prioritize the emergency case lying right there. Seeing the man huddling into the corner of the room, she approached and asked why he was curling up like that. She guessed he was in a lot of pain, so she handed him the holy water and told him to drink it to get better quickly. Noticing his hesitation, she wondered if he had never used holy water before and advised him not to be picky at a time like this. To make him recover quickly, she decided to personally pour the holy water into his mouth, ignoring his coughing fits. She told him to endure it because even though it didn't taste good, it would help heal his wounds fast. While doing so, she suddenly remembered an extremely important thing she had forgotten. She pressed him for his name, but he remained silent, his face smeared with holy water, refusing to answer. She assumed that because he was a hunted beastman, he was hesitant to reveal his true identity to a stranger. Recalling the cute pink paw pads when he was still in wolf form, she got an idea. She declared that from now on she would call him Jolie, leaving the guy speechless and drooling in despair. The man could only mutter complaints, feeling that the name was a cruel insult to him. The scene shifted to the Johansson mansion as night began to fall. For the night shift staff, work only truly ended when the curtains were drawn tight and the lights in the mansion began to dim. Today was Oliver's turn to patrol the 4th floor. Even though her colleagues reassured her that Lady Evangeline rarely went out, she still felt afraid. The agonizing groans echoing down the hallway made Oliver tremble, wondering how she could not be scared. Following the lantern's light, she went around turning off the lights while noticing that the bizarre noise was getting closer. Oliver was terrified to see fresh blood splatters on the floor right beneath her feet. She screamed in panic as she slipped and fell right in the middle of a foul-smelling pool of blood. Suddenly, someone firmly grabbed her shoulder and whispered, telling her to be extremely careful. The person warned that if she fell backward, Oliver would roll straight down the stairs below. Oliver shivered as the person said that the night was very dangerous and urged her to quickly go inside the house. She could only stammer her compliance, still in a state of shock. Oliver softly thanked the red-haired woman standing quietly behind her. Upon returning to the break room, a colleague scolded Oliver for being so late, as she was the last one who hadn't returned her lantern. Oliver was surprised, insisting that everyone had gone to sleep, but she was confused because she had just met Canna. However, her colleague firmly stated that there was no one named Canna on the night shift tonight. Oliver was dumbfounded, not understanding what her friend was talking about. The horrifying truth was revealed that among the entities lingering around the Johansson mansion late at night, there were things that weren't human at all. And their most terrifying identifying feature was that they never carried lanterns when moving through the dark.